The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the general store, and Margaret Mitchell stepped down into the dusty street of Rock Springs, Wyoming, her black mourning dress gathering red dust at the hem as she steadied herself against the weathered wooden post. The year was 1878, and this frontier town represented her last hope for a fresh start, even if that start was built on a lie that weighed heavier than the single trunk containing all her worldly possessions. She adjusted the black veil covering her face and took a deep breath, preparing to become someone she was not. The driver hauled her trunk down with a grunt, tipping his hat as she pressed a coin into his weathered palm. Around her, Rock Springs bustled with afternoon activity. Cowboys led horses to the livery stable, miners fresh from the coal deposits that had put this town on the map crowded into the saloon, and respectable townsfolk went about their business with purposeful strides. Margaret felt their eyes on her, curiosity burning behind polite nods of sympathy for the young widow in their midst. She had rehearsed her story during the long journey from Philadelphia. Her husband, she would tell anyone who asked, had died of fever just 6 months into their marriage. She was 23 years old and alone in the world, seeking a quiet place to grieve and perhaps start anew. The truth was far more complicated and infinitely more shameful in the eyes of society. There had never been a husband. There had only been a broken engagement to a cruel man whose true nature she had discovered just days before their wedding, and her desperate flight westward before he could make good on his threats to ruin her reputation if she dared to leave him. The boarding house stood 2 streets over, a tidy white building with blue shutters that looked almost cheerful despite the rough-hewn character of the town surrounding it. Mrs. Henderson, the proprietress, was a stout woman with kind eyes who showed Margaret to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. The older woman patted her hand with genuine sympathy when Margaret explained in a soft voice that she was recently widowed and seeking peace. "You poor dear, Mrs. Henderson said, her voice warm with compassion. "Rock Springs may be rough around the edges, but folks here respect grief. You will find kindness here, I promise you that." Guilt twisted in Margaret's stomach, but she smiled behind her veil and thanked the woman. What choice did she have? An unmarried woman traveling alone raised questions and attracted unwanted attention. A widow, however, was afforded respect and a certain protective distance. She needed that distance, needed time to figure out what came next in a life that had veered so dramatically off the course she had once imagined for herself. That evening, as the sun painted the Wyoming sky in shades of orange and pink, Margaret stood at her window and watched the town settle into twilight. She noticed a tall figure leading a paint horse down the street, his gait easy and confident. Even from this distance, she could see the way other men nodded to him in respect, the way he moved with a natural authority that came from competence rather than arrogance. Something about the set of his shoulders, the gentle way he handled his horse, made her linger at the window longer than she intended. She did not know then that the man was Harrison Lake, foreman of the Double R Ranch that sprawled across thousands of acres west of town. She did not know that he was 27 years old, respected by every man in the territory, and that he had noticed the woman in black stepping off the stagecoach with an interest that surprised him. Harrison had long ago accepted that his life was the ranch, the cattle, the endless work that came with managing other men and vast stretches of unforgiving land. Women were a complication he had no time for, no matter how his mother wrote letters from her home in Colorado begging him to settle down and give her grandchildren. But there had been something about the way the woman in mourning had stood so straight, despite the obvious exhaustion of travel, something about the graceful way she moved that had caught his attention and refused to let go. 3 days passed before they met properly. Margaret had ventured into the general store to purchase fabric for new curtains, determined to make her small room feel more like home. She was examining a bolt of cheerful yellow calico when a deep voice spoke behind her. "That is a happy color for someone in mourning." She turned quickly, finding herself looking up at the man she had seen from her window. Up close, Harrison Lake was even more striking than she had realized. He had dark hair that needed a trim, eyes the color of storm clouds, and a face that was handsome in a rugged, weathered way that spoke of long days in the sun and wind. He held his hat in his hands, and there was genuine curiosity in his expression, not judgment. Margaret felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Even widows need curtains, sir. The ones in my room are practically falling apart." "I did not mean offense," he said quickly, and she heard sincerity in his voice. "I am Harrison Lake. Most folks call me Harrison. I run the Double R Ranch west of town." "Margaret Mitchell," she replied, noting how his large hand engulfed hers when they shook. His grip was firm but careful, mindful of her smaller hand. "And I took no offense. You are right that it is a cheerful color. Perhaps that is exactly what I need." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "How long has it been, if you do not mind my asking?" She had practiced this lie so many times that it should have come easily, but looking into his honest face made the words stick in her throat. "Not long. 6 months since the fever took him." Harrison nodded slowly, and she saw compassion in his eyes that made her guilt burn hotter. "That is fresh grief indeed. Rock Springs is a good place for healing, Mrs. Mitchell. Folks here understand that sometimes a person needs space to find their feet again." "That is what I am hoping for," she said softly. And that, at least, was the truth. He helped her carry her purchases back to the boarding house, despite her protests that it was not necessary. As they walked, he told her about the town, pointing out which establishments were respectable and which she should avoid. His voice was easy and warm, and Margaret found herself relaxing in his presence in a way she had not relaxed in months. "The church is just there," he said, gesturing to a white building with a modest steeple. "Reverend Collins is a good man, gives a decent sermon without too much fire and brimstone, and the schoolhouse is next to it. We have about 15 children in town now, enough to justify keeping Miss Abernathy on as teacher." "You have children, Mr. Lake?" The question was out before she could stop it, too personal for a first conversation. He shook his head, a wry smile touching his lips. "No wife, no children. The ranch keeps me busy enough that I have not had time for much else. My mother despairs of me, writes letters full of descriptions of nice young women back in Denver who would make excellent wives." Margaret felt an unexpected flutter in her chest at the knowledge that he was unmarried. She pushed it down firmly. She had no business feeling anything of the sort, not when she was supposed to be grieving, not when her entire presence in this town was built on deception. At the boarding house steps, Harrison set down her parcels and tipped his hat. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Mrs. Mitchell. I hope Rock Springs proves to be everything you are looking for." "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Lake." "Harrison," he corrected gently. "In these parts we do not stand much on ceremony." She found herself smiling behind her veil. "Then you must call me Margaret." His answering smile did something strange to her heartbeat. "Margaret it is, then. I am sure I will see you around town." She watched him walk away, his long strides eating up the distance, and felt a complicated tangle of emotions she was not ready to examine. She had come west to escape, to hide, to figure out who she was without the expectations and constraints of Philadelphia society. She had not come looking for a man with kind eyes and a gentle manner who made her think, for the first time in her life, that perhaps not all men were like Thomas Ashford, her former fiancé whose cruelty she had discovered too late. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant rhythm. Margaret sewed curtains and helped Mrs. Henderson with tasks around the boarding house, earning her keep and establishing herself as a quiet, respectable presence in the community. She attended church on Sundays, where she met other women in town who welcomed her with sympathy and offers of friendship. She learned that Rock Springs was a town in transition, growing from a rough mining camp into something more permanent as families settled and businesses established themselves. And she saw Harrison, not every day, but often enough that she began to recognize the pattern of his visits to town. He would come in for supplies, to conduct business at the bank, to check on various matters that required the presence of the double Articus foreman. And somehow, their paths would cross. A brief conversation outside the general store. A shared dinner table at the boarding house when Mrs. Henderson invited him to stay after conducting some business with her. A moment of greeting on the street, his hat tipping, her hand raising in return. Each encounter was proper, respectful of her supposed widowhood. But Margaret could not help noticing the way his gaze lingered on her face, the way he seemed to find reasons to extend their conversations. And she could not deny the way her heart lifted when she caught sight of his tall figure walking down the street, the way she found herself watching for him, hoping to see him. 2 months after her arrival in Rock Springs, Harrison appeared at the boarding house with an unusual request. Mrs. Henderson called Margaret down to the parlor, where Harrison stood turning his hat in his hands, looking almost nervous. "Margaret," he began, then cleared his throat. "I hope this is not inappropriate given your circumstances, but I find myself in need of a favor." "What sort of favor?" she asked, curious about what could make this confident man appear uncertain. "The Double R is hosting a gathering next Saturday. Just the neighboring ranchers and their families, some of the business owners from town. My boss, Richard Reynolds, he likes to maintain good relationships with the community. Usually his wife handles the social aspects, but she is visiting her sister in Cheyenne and will not be back in time. Mr. Reynolds has asked if I might find someone to help with the hostessing duties." He met her eyes directly. "I know it is asking a lot, and I understand completely if you feel it would not be appropriate, but I thought of you." Margaret's first instinct was to refuse. Attending a social gathering seemed like a step too far out of mourning, the sort of thing that would invite gossip. But she had been in Rock Springs for 2 months now, and the isolation of her grief was beginning to wear on her. More than that, she wanted to see Harrison's world, wanted to understand the place where he spent his days. "What would be required of me?" she asked carefully. Relief flooded his expression. "Greeting guests, making sure everyone is comfortable, helping with the food service." Mrs. Reynolds hired women from town to do the cooking and serving, but they need someone to direct them, to play hostess. The gathering is meant to strengthen community ties, show that the Double R is part of Rock Springs, not separate from it. Margaret considered. Would it be seen as improper? "I am supposed to be in mourning." Harrison's voice was gentle. "You would not be there as a guest seeking entertainment. You would be there in a working capacity, helping a neighbor. I think most folks would see it as charitable of you to assist." The rationalization was thin, and they both knew it, but Margaret found herself nodding. "Then I will help if you truly need it." The smile that broke across Harrison's face was worth any potential scandal. "Thank you, Margaret, truly. I will send a wagon to collect you on Saturday morning so you can help with preparations." True to his word, a wagon driven by a cheerful ranch hand named Pete arrived Saturday morning. Margaret had dressed carefully in one of her black dresses, but she had chosen the one with slightly less severe lines, and she had foregone the heavy veil in favor of a simple black bonnet. As they drove west out of town, she watched the landscape change from the dusty streets of Rock Springs to the rolling grasslands dotted with cattle. The Double R Ranch house was larger than she had expected, a sprawling structure of timber and stone that spoke of prosperity and permanence. Corrals and outbuildings spread in every direction, and she could see cowboys working horses in the distance. Harrison emerged from the house as the wagon pulled up, and the smile he gave her made the long ride worthwhile. "Welcome to the Double R," he said, helping her down with hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary on her waist. "Let me show you around before the chaos begins." He walked her through the house, pointing out where everything was located, explaining the plan for the gathering. The main room was enormous, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and furniture that was sturdy and comfortable rather than fancy. Through the windows, she could see the vast expanse of land that the ranch encompassed. "How many acres?" she asked, awed by the sheer scale. 15,000, give or take. We run about 3,000 head of cattle. It is a big operation, but Mr. Reynolds has built something solid here. He came west 20 years ago with nothing and created all this through hard work and smart decisions. Harrison's voice carried respect and pride. "I have been with him for 8 years now. He has taught me everything about ranching." The gathering began around noon, with neighbors arriving on horseback and in wagons. Margaret found herself genuinely enjoying the work of greeting people, ensuring everyone had food and drink, facilitating introductions. The women she met were friendly, the men respectful, and the children full of energy and laughter. She saw a different side of Harrison as he moved through the crowd, clearly liked and respected, at ease with both the rough cowboys and the more refined townsfolk. Several times during the afternoon, she caught him watching her. Their eyes would meet across the room, and something unspoken would pass between them, something that made her breath catch and her pulse quicken. As the sun began to set, and guests prepared to depart, Harrison found her in the kitchen helping clean up. "You were magnificent today." "Thank you for doing this." Margaret wiped her hands on a towel, suddenly aware of how domestic the scene was, how right it felt to be here in his world. "I enjoyed it more than I expected. Everyone was kind. That is because you made them feel welcome." He stepped closer, and she could smell leather and sage and something indefinably masculine. "Margaret, I know this may be forward of me, but I would like to see you again. Not just chance meetings in town. I would like to call on you properly if you would allow it." Her heart hammered in her chest. This was the moment she should refuse, should remind him that she was a widow, that it was too soon. But the lie was choking her, and the truth of her feelings was undeniable. She cared for this man, had been falling for him in increments over the past weeks, and the thought of sending him away was unbearable. "Harrison, there is something I need to tell you." The words came out before she could stop them, driven by a need for honesty that was stronger than her fear. He waited, his expression open and patient. Margaret took a deep breath, her hands trembling. This could ruin everything, could turn his respect to disgust, but she could not continue the lie. Not with him. Not when what was growing between them felt so real and precious. "I am not a widow," she said quietly, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I have never been married. I lied when I came to Rock Springs." Harrison's expression did not change immediately. He simply looked at her, processing her words. "Go on," he said finally, his voice neutral. The story poured out of her then, the whole truth that she had held locked inside for months. She told him about Thomas Ashford, about the engagement that had seemed like a dream come true, until she discovered the reality of the man behind the charming facade. She described finding out about his gambling debts, his violent temper that he had carefully hidden from her family, the way he had threatened to destroy her reputation if she dared to break their engagement. "I overheard him talking to a friend," she said, her voice shaking with the memory. "He said that once we were married, I would learn my place, that he would break me of my independent ways. He laughed about it, talked about me like I was a horse that needed taming. I realized that he did not love me. He loved my father's money and the idea of controlling me." Harrison listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. "I ran," Margaret continued. "I took what money I had saved, packed a single trunk, and I left Philadelphia in the middle of the night. I knew he would come after me if he found out where I went, would make good on his threats to ruin me. So I became a widow. I thought that if people believed I was grieving, they would leave me alone, give me the space I needed to figure out what to do next. I never meant to hurt anyone with my lie. I just needed to disappear, to be someone else for a while." She stopped, her confession complete, and waited for his judgment. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of guests departing and the kitchen staff finishing their work. Finally, Harrison spoke. "Look at me, Margaret." She raised her eyes to his, expecting to see anger or disgust. Instead, she saw something that looked like understanding. "You know what I see when I look at you?" he asked. "I see a woman who was brave enough to walk away from a situation that would have destroyed her. I see someone who did what she had to do to survive and start over. That takes more courage than most people ever need to find." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "You are not angry that I lied. Did you lie to hurt anyone? Did you come here to trick people or take advantage?" Harrison's voice was firm. "No, you came here to hide, to heal, to figure out who you are without someone else trying to define you. Yes, you wore mourning and let people believe a story that was not true. But you did not do it with malicious intent. But I lied to you," she whispered. He reached out and took her hand, his rough fingers gentle as they intertwined with hers. "And now you have told me the truth, even though you were scared of how I would react. That matters more to me than the lie ever could. Harrison, I care about you." The admission felt dangerous and liberating all at once. "I have been falling for you these past weeks, and it has been torture because I thought I could never tell you the truth, never let anything real develop between us. I could not bear the thought of building something with you on a foundation of lies." His other hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "I have been falling for you too, from the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach. I tried to tell myself it was inappropriate, that you were grieving, that I should keep my distance. But I could not stay away, Margaret. I have never felt like this about anyone." "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harrison's smile was slow and warm. "Now we start over, with honesty between us. I know who you really are, and I want to keep getting to know you if you will have me. We can take it slow, do this properly. But I need you to know that what you told me today does not change how I feel about you. If anything, it makes me admire you more." Margaret felt something unlock in her chest, a weight she had been carrying for months suddenly lifting. "I would like that very much." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not want that at all. Their first kiss was soft and sweet, a promise of things to come, and Margaret felt her world shift on its axis. For the first time since fleeing Philadelphia, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The wagon ride back to town that evening was filled with quiet conversation as they made plans. Harrison agreed that they should be discreet for a while, let the truth of Margaret's situation come out gradually. She would tell Mrs. Henderson first, then slowly let others know that she had stretched the truth about her circumstances. It would cause some gossip, but Harrison was confident that the community would accept her once they understood she had been running from danger. "People in Rock Springs understand fresh starts," he assured her. "Half the folks here are running from something or starting over. You are hardly the first person to arrive with a past you would rather leave behind." Over the following weeks, Margaret began the process of shedding her false identity. She told Mrs. Henderson the truth first, and the older woman, after an initial moment of surprise, pulled her into a warm embrace and told her she was glad Margaret had found the courage to be honest. "I never quite believed the widow's story anyway," Mrs. Henderson admitted with a knowing smile. "You did not carry yourself like a woman who had lost a great love. You carried yourself like a woman who was hiding from something. I am just glad it was from danger and not from the law." Other women in town were similarly understanding when they learned the truth. Some were more scandalized than others, but Harrison's clear regard for Margaret lent her respectability, and his position in the community meant that few people were willing to openly criticize her once they knew she had his protection. Thomas Ashford's name did not come up in Rock Springs. Margaret watched the mail carefully for any sign that he had tracked her west, but as weeks turned into months, she began to believe that she had truly escaped him. Perhaps he had found another woman to marry for her money, or perhaps her father had paid him off to avoid the scandal of a broken engagement. Either way, her past seemed to be staying in Philadelphia, where it belonged. Harrison courted her properly, with evening walks and dinners at the boarding house, with rides out to the ranch where she got to see him in his element, commanding respect from the cowboys while gentling a skittish horse or doctoring a sick calf. She loved watching him work, loved the competence and confidence he brought to everything he did. They talked endlessly, discovering each other in conversations that ranged from silly to profound. Harrison told her about growing up in Colorado, about his father who had died when Harrison was 15, leaving him to help support his mother and younger sister. He talked about coming to Wyoming at 19 with nothing but a saddle and a determination to make something of himself, about Richard Reynolds taking a chance on a green kid and teaching him the ranching business from the ground up. Margaret told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about a mother who had died when Margaret was 12, and a father who had thrown himself into his shipping business to cope with his grief, leaving Margaret to be raised primarily by governesses and boarding schools. She talked about the loneliness of growing up with privilege, but without real warmth, about her desire for something more meaningful than the society life that seemed to be her only option. "I wanted to matter," she confessed one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch watching the stars emerge. "Not as some man's decorative wife, but as myself. I wanted to do something real, to help people or create something or just know that my life had purpose beyond looking pretty and running a household." Harrison took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "You matter, Margaret. Here in Rock Springs, you are not just some society wife. You are yourself, free to be whoever you want to be." "That is what I love about the West," she said softly. "It feels like a place where you can reinvent yourself, where your past matters less than what you are willing to work for now." "That is exactly what it is," Harrison agreed. "And you fit here, Margaret. I see it in the way you have made friends, the way you are not afraid to roll up your sleeves and help when something needs doing. You belong here." The words warmed her from the inside out, because she was beginning to believe it herself. Rock Springs was becoming home in a way Philadelphia never had been. She was building real friendships with women like Sarah Chen, who ran the laundry with her husband and made Margaret laugh with her dry wit, and Emma Foster, the teacher who was passionate about education and had enlisted Margaret's help in organizing a small lending library for the town. 6 months after her arrival in Rock Springs, Harrison asked her to marry him. They were at the ranch, sitting on the porch of the main house as the sun set over the grasslands. He had been unusually quiet during dinner, and Margaret had sensed something was on his mind. "I have been thinking about the future," Harrison began, turning to face her. "About what I want my life to look like in 5 years, in 10 years, and in every version I imagine you are there." Margaret's heart began to race. "I know we have not been courting for long by some standards," he continued, "but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Margaret Mitchell. I love your courage and your kindness, your quick mind and your gentle heart. I love the way you laugh and the way you challenge me when you think I am wrong. I love who I am when I am with you." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "It is not fancy," he said, "but it is honest like us. Margaret, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here in Wyoming?" Tears streamed down Margaret's face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, I will marry you. I love you, Harrison. I think I have loved you since the day you helped me carry fabric from the general store and did not judge me for buying something cheerful." His kiss was deeper than their previous ones, full of promise and passion, and Margaret felt her entire body respond. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "We will do this right," he said. "A proper wedding with the whole town invited. I want everyone to know that you are mine and I am yours." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Rock Springs. Margaret wore a dress of pale blue silk that Mrs. Henderson and the other women had helped her sew, declaring that she had been in mourning long enough and deserved to wear something joyful for her wedding. Harrison stood at the altar in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Margaret as she walked down the aisle on the arm of Mr. Henderson, who had kindly offered to give her away. The church was packed with well-wishers, and the celebration afterward at the Double R was one of the biggest gatherings Rock Springs had seen. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and Margaret found herself surrounded by genuine affection and good wishes. These people had become her community, her family, and their joy for her and Harrison was real and heartfelt. As night fell and the party continued around them, Harrison pulled Margaret away for a private moment under the stars. "Happy, Mrs. Lake?" Margaret smiled up at him, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Happier than I ever thought possible. This day has been perfect." "The day is not over yet," he said with a grin that made her blush. They had decided to spend their wedding night at the ranch in a small cabin that Harrison had fixed up just for them, a place that would be theirs alone until they could build a proper house. The cabin was simple but cozy, with a large bed covered in a quilt made by the women of the town as a wedding gift. Harrison carried Margaret over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently. His hands came up to cup her face, his expression suddenly serious. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me," he said. "I could never regret this," Margaret whispered back. "You saved me, Harrison, not just from Thomas, but from a life that would have slowly crushed my spirit. You gave me freedom and love and a place to belong." "You saved yourself," he corrected gently. "I just had the good fortune to be here when you arrived." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both awed and satisfied. In Harrison's arms, Margaret felt truly safe for the first time in her life, cherished and desired and loved for exactly who she was. The months that followed were full of hard work and deep happiness. Margaret threw herself into life on the Double R, learning the rhythms of ranch life. She took over management of the vegetable garden and the chickens, helped with the bookkeeping, and became an integral part of the operation. Harrison had been right about her fitting into the West. She loved the physical work, the sense of accomplishment at the end of each day, the feeling of building something real and lasting. Their first winter together was harsh, with blizzards that kept them snowed in for days at a time. But those days only brought them closer, giving them time to talk and plan and dream about the future. They talked about eventually buying their own spread, about the children they hoped to have, about growing old together on this land they both loved. Spring brought new life to the ranch and new developments in their own lives. Margaret realized she was pregnant in April, and Harrison's joy at the news was so profound that it brought tears to her eyes. He became almost comically protective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work, until she finally had to sit him down and explain that pregnant women did not break just from lifting things. "I know that," he protested, looking sheepish. "I just want to take care of you." "You do take care of me," she assured him, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "But I am strong, Harrison. Stronger than you give me credit for sometimes. I will tell you if I need to rest or if something is too much. But I will not spend the next 6 months being treated like fragile china." He laughed and kissed her soundly. "Fair enough. But you have to promise to tell me if you need anything. I know I can be overprotective, but it is only because I love you both so much already." Their daughter was born in December of 1879, in the midst of another Wyoming winter, with Mrs. Henderson and the doctor from town in attendance. Harrison paced outside the room during the labor, and when the doctor finally emerged to tell him he had a healthy daughter, he burst into the room to find Margaret exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Meet Helen," Margaret said softly, naming the baby after Harrison's mother. Helen Rose Lake. Harrison took his daughter carefully, looking down at the tiny face with an expression of pure wonder. "She is perfect. You are perfect, both of my girls." Watching him with their daughter, seeing the gentleness in his rough hands and the love in his eyes, Margaret felt her heart expand even further. This man, this life, this love they had built together was more than she had ever dared to dream of when she stepped off that stagecoach nearly 2 years ago. Little Helen proved to be a sunny-natured baby who seemed to charm everyone she met. Harrison was a devoted father, happy to walk the floor with her when she was fussy, to make silly faces that made her giggle, to include her in ranch life from the earliest possible age. By the time she was 2, Helen was toddling after her father, wanting to be wherever he was, mimicking his gestures and expressions in ways that made Margaret laugh. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered under Harrison's management, and Richard Reynolds, impressed by Harrison's dedication and skill, made him a partner in the operation. It meant more responsibility but also more stability and a share in the profits. Harrison and Margaret began making plans to build their own house on a piece of land. Reynolds gave them as part of the partnership agreement. Margaret had found her purpose too. She had started teaching reading and writing to some of the ranch hands who had never had the opportunity to learn, and word had spread. Soon, she was holding classes twice a week in the bunkhouse, with grown men bent over slates like schoolboys, determined to better themselves. The satisfaction she felt watching these tough cowboys master their letters was immense. On a warm summer evening in 1882, Margaret and Harrison sat on the porch of their new house watching Helen play in the yard with the ranch dogs. Margaret's hand rested on her swollen belly, pregnant with their second child. The house they had built was everything they had dreamed of. A solid 2-story structure with a big kitchen, a proper parlor, and enough bedrooms for the large family they both wanted. "Do you ever think about Philadelphia?" Harrison asked, his arm around her shoulders. Margaret considered the question. "Sometimes. I think about my father, wonder if he is well, but I do not miss that life if that is what you are asking. This is home. You and Helen and this new little one, the ranch, Rock Springs, this is where I belong. No regrets about the choices you made. His voice was curious rather than worried. They had built such trust between them that these questions were safe to ask and answer. My only regret is that I did not come west sooner, Margaret said honestly. I wasted years being who I thought I was supposed to be instead of figuring out who I actually was. But then again, if I had come west earlier, I might not have met you. So perhaps everything happened exactly when it was supposed to. Harrison pulled her closer and kissed her temple. I like that way of thinking about it. We found each other at exactly the right time. Do you ever regret taking a chance on a woman who lied to the whole town? The question still sometimes surfaced, even though she knew the answer. Never, Harrison said firmly. You did what you had to do to survive, and you told me the truth when it mattered, even though you were afraid. That took real courage, Margaret. I have never regretted loving you, not for one single moment. Their son was born in October, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Henry James Lake, and if Harrison was pleased to have a son to carry on the family name, he was careful never to make Helen feel less important. He doted on both his children equally, and Margaret often found herself watching the three of them together with a sense of deep contentment. The years flowed past, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of family life. Helen started school and proved to be a voracious reader like her mother. Henry grew from a quiet baby into a mischievous toddler who kept everyone on their toes. The ranch continued to prosper, and Harrison's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher grew throughout the territory. In 1884, a letter arrived from Philadelphia. Margaret recognized her father's handwriting on the envelope and felt her heart squeeze with a mixture of emotions. She had not heard from him since leaving, had assumed he had disowned her for the scandal of her broken engagement and disappearance. Harrison found her in the kitchen, the unopened letter in her trembling hands. "Do you want me to read it first?" he offered gently. She shook her head. "No. Whatever it says, we will face it together." The letter was shorter than she expected and filled with regret. Her father wrote that Thomas Ashford's true nature had come to light shortly after Margaret's disappearance, when he had been arrested for fraud and assault. The scandal had rocked Philadelphia society, and her father had realized that Margaret's flight had saved her from a terrible fate. He apologized for not seeing Ashford's true character, for not protecting her better, for his anger when she had run. He wrote that he had hired investigators to find her, not to bring her back but simply to know that she was safe and well. Those investigators had finally tracked her to Rock Springs, and he was writing to beg her forgiveness and to ask if she might be willing to reconcile. Margaret read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face, then handed it to Harrison. He read it carefully, then pulled her into his arms. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to write back," Margaret said slowly. "I want him to know that I am well, that I am happy, that I have built a good life here. I want him to know about you and Helen and Henry, but I do not want to go back, not even for a visit." "You do not have to go anywhere you do not want to go," Harrison assured her. "This is your home, and no one can make you leave it." Margaret wrote a long letter back to her father, telling him about her life in Wyoming, about Harrison and the children and the ranch. She enclosed a photograph that had been taken the previous summer, showing her and Harrison with Helen and baby Henry. She wrote honestly about how hurt she had been by his initial reaction to her broken engagement, but also about her understanding that he had been deceived by Thomas Ashford, just as she had been. She left the door open for correspondence, but made it clear that Rock Springs was her home now, and she had no intention of returning to Philadelphia. Her father's reply, when it came months later, was full of joy at knowing she was well and thriving. He wrote regularly after that, letters that grew warmer and more personal over time. He sent gifts for the children and congratulated Harrison on being the man who had won his daughter's heart. While they never saw each other in person again, her father's health was declining, and travel was difficult. The reconciliation through letters brought Margaret a peace she had not known she needed. By 1886, Harrison and Margaret had 4 children. After Henry came another daughter, Grace, and then finally another son, James. The house they had built was full of noise and laughter, of muddy boots in the entryway and slates covering the kitchen table. Margaret's days were busy with cooking and cleaning, teaching and tending, but she had never been happier. Harrison had become one of the most respected ranchers in Wyoming, known for his fair treatment of his workers and his innovative approaches to cattle management. He had bought out Richard Reynolds's share of the Double R when Reynolds decided to retire to California, making Harrison and Margaret the sole owners of the vast property. On a spring evening in 1887, nearly 9 years after Margaret had first arrived in Rock Springs, she and Harrison took a rare evening to themselves. Mrs. Henderson had offered to watch the children, and they rode out to a favorite spot on the ranch where a small creek wound through cottonwood trees. They spread a blanket and sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I was thinking about the day we met," Harrison said, his arm around Margaret as she leaned against his shoulder. "Do you remember? You were buying fabric for curtains." Margaret smiled at the memory. "And you made a comment about cheerful colors and mourning. I remember thinking you were presumptuous and kind all at once. I knew even then that there was something special about you. I tried to tell myself to keep my distance, that you were off limits, but I could not help myself. I had to know you." "I am glad you did," Margaret said softly. "I am glad you saw past my mourning clothes to the woman underneath. I am glad you gave me the chance to tell you the truth, and that you loved me anyway." "Not anyway," Harrison corrected, tilting her face up to his. "Not despite your past, or your lies, or your mistakes. I love you, Margaret, all of you, including the parts that are messy and complicated. Your past is part of what made you who you are, and who you are is exactly who I want to spend my life with." She kissed him then, a kiss that still held the passion and promise of their wedding night, even after years of marriage and 4 children. Some things did not fade with time, and the love between them was one of those things. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had not run?" Harrison asked later, as stars began to appear overhead. Margaret thought about it seriously. "I would have been trapped in a marriage with a cruel man. I would have been miserable, probably for the rest of my life. Or perhaps I would have found the courage to leave eventually, but by then I would have been broken in ways that would be hard to heal. Running saved me, Harrison. It saved my life, maybe even literally." "I am grateful you ran," Harrison said quietly. "Grateful that you were brave enough to choose yourself, even when it was hard and scary. Because of that choice, you found your way to me and I found you. Our children exist because you had the courage to get on that stagecoach and come west." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing and the sound of one of the cowboys playing a harmonica. It was peaceful and perfect, exactly the kind of moment that made all the hard work worthwhile. As the years continued to pass, Harrison and Margaret built not just a ranch but a legacy. Their children grew up strong and capable, learning the value of hard work and honest dealing. Helen became a teacher like her mother, opening a school on the ranch for the children of the workers. Henry took to ranching like he was born to it, learning everything his father could teach him about cattle and horses and land management. Grace proved to have a gift with animals, especially horses, and could gentle even the most skittish mount. Young James, following in his mother's footsteps, showed a love of books and learning that suggested he might become a lawyer or teacher. Margaret continued her literacy classes, and over the years she taught dozens of men and women to read and write. Some of them went on to better positions, able to read contracts and keep accounts. Others simply gained the satisfaction of being able to read a letter from home or write their own thoughts down. Either way, Margaret felt like she was making a real difference, giving people tools that would serve them for life. The ranch prospered beyond their wildest dreams. Harrison's careful management and willingness to adopt new techniques kept them ahead of harder times that plagued other ranchers. They weathered droughts and hard winters, cattle disease and market fluctuations, always managing to come through stronger than before. Harrison attributed much of their success to partnership, telling anyone who would listen that Margaret was as much a part of running the ranch as he was, even if her contributions were different from his. In 1892, Rock Springs held a celebration for its 20th anniversary as an incorporated town. Harrison and Margaret, as pillars of the community, were asked to say a few words at the gathering. Standing in front of the assembled crowd, Margaret felt a rush of emotion as she looked out at all the familiar faces, people who had become her family over the years. "When I came to Rock Springs 14 years ago," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I was running from a life that would have destroyed me. I came here pretending to be someone I was not, hiding behind a lie because I was scared and did not know what else to do." There was utter silence in the crowd. Even though most people knew her story by now, hearing her speak it aloud was powerful. "This town gave me something I had never had before, the freedom to be myself. The people here accepted me, not because of my family name or my social standing, but because of who I was and what I was willing to contribute. Rock Springs taught me that your past does not have to define your future, that you can start over and build something real and good." She reached for Harrison's hand and he stepped up beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "I found more than a home here. I found love and purpose and community. I found out who I really am and who I want to be. So thank you, Rock Springs, for taking in a scared young woman and giving her the chance to become someone she can be proud of." The applause was thunderous, and Margaret saw more than a few people wiping tears from their eyes. Harrison squeezed her hand, his own eyes bright with emotion and pride. That night, lying in bed with Harrison's arms around her, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a frightened woman fleeing an engagement that would have ruined her life, to a respected member of the community, wife to a man she loved beyond measure, mother to 4 wonderful children, partner in a successful ranch, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "About how lucky I am," Margaret said softly. "About how one decision to be brave changed everything." "I am the lucky one," Harrison countered, pulling her closer. "You walked into my life and made it infinitely better. Every single day with you is a gift, Margaret." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the love they had built and the life they shared. The children grew and eventually began families of their own. Helen married a lawyer from Cheyenne and gave Margaret and Harrison their first grandchildren. Henry married the daughter of a neighboring rancher, combining their properties and creating an even larger operation. Grace shocked everyone by becoming a veterinarian, one of the few women in the profession, and made a name for herself throughout the territory. James went east to college and became a teacher, eventually returning to Wyoming to run a boarding school for ranch children who lived too far from town to attend regular school. Through it all, Harrison and Margaret remained the center, the foundation upon which their family was built. They had their challenges, health scares, financial setbacks, the normal struggles that come with decades of life and business, but they faced everything together, their love and partnership never wavering. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1904, their children organized a massive celebration at the ranch. People came from all over Wyoming and even neighboring states, a testament to the respect and affection in which Harrison and Margaret were held. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, and more food than one family could possibly eat. As Margaret watched her grown children laughing with their own children, as she danced with Harrison under the stars just as they had at their wedding, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life she had been given. Not given, she corrected herself, the life she had fought for, worked for, built with her own two hands and with the man she loved. "Happy, my love?" Harrison asked, echoing the question he had asked on their wedding night so many years ago. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Margaret answered, the same words she had spoken then, but with 25 years of lived experience behind them now. Harrison pulled her closer, and they swayed to the music, surrounded by family and friends, by the land they had built a life on, by the legacy they were leaving behind. "I love you, Margaret Lake," Harrison said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you since the day you walked into my life, and I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," Margaret replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. "You saved me, Harrison. You showed me what real love looks like, what partnership and respect and devotion mean. You gave me the freedom to be myself and loved me for exactly who I am." "We saved each other," Harrison said firmly. "You made me believe in love, made me want more from life than just work and duty. You made me happier than I knew was possible." As the celebration continued around them, Margaret rested her head against Harrison's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off a stagecoach in Rock Springs in 1878, wearing mourning clothes and hiding behind a lie. That woman had been so lost, so scared, so uncertain of her future. And now look where she was. Surrounded by love, respected in her community, secure in herself and her place in the world. The lie she had told had led her to the truth of who she was meant to be, the truth of what love could be when it was real and freely given. The years continued to march on, bringing more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Harrison and Margaret grew old together, their hair turning white, their bodies slowing down, but their love remaining as strong as ever. They handed over the day-to-day running of the ranch to Henry and his family. But they remained active and engaged, never losing interest in the land and the community they had helped build. On a warm summer evening in 1915, Margaret sat on the porch of their house with Harrison beside her, watching the sun set over the Wyoming grasslands. They were both in their 60s now, their hands gnarled with age and hard work, but still clasped together as they had been for 37 years. "Do you remember what you said to me the day I told you the truth?" Margaret asked, her voice soft with memory. "You said that you saw a woman who was brave enough to walk away from a situation that would have destroyed her." Harrison nodded, a smile touching his weathered face. "I remember. And I meant every word. I have been thinking about that lately," Margaret continued, "about the choices we make and how they ripple out through our lives. If I had not been brave that one time, if I had not gotten on that stagecoach and come west, none of this would exist. Our children, our grandchildren, the life we built together, it all stems from that one moment of courage. You had many moments of courage, Harrison said firmly. Leaving Philadelphia, yes, but also choosing to tell me the truth, even when you were scared I would reject you. Choosing to build a life here instead of running again when things got hard. Choosing love over fear again and again, year after year. Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor for nearly 4 decades. I could not have done any of it without you. You made me feel safe enough to be brave. You loved me when I did not know how to love myself. We were good for each other, Harrison said, his arm coming around her shoulders. We still are. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the ranch cattle lowing, horses whinnying, the voices of their grandchildren playing in the yard. It was the sound of life continuing, of the legacy they had built together. Harrison Lake died peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1918, surrounded by his family. Margaret held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart broke, she also felt a deep gratitude for the life they had shared. 40 years of love and partnership, of building something real and lasting together. It was more than most people ever got, and she knew how blessed she had been. She lived another 7 years, spending her days surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them part of the legacy she and Harrison had created. She continued to teach, to garden, to be an active part of the community she had made her home. Margaret Lake died in her sleep in the spring of 1925, at the age of 70. Her funeral was one of the largest Rock Springs had ever seen, with people coming from across the state to pay their respects to a woman who had touched so many lives. They buried her next to Harrison on a hillside overlooking the ranch, where they could rest together forever in the land they had loved. Her obituary, written by her son James, told the truth of her story, how she had come west fleeing danger, how she had hidden behind a lie until she found the courage to live in truth, how she had built a life of purpose and meaning in Rock Springs. It did not shy away from the complicated beginning, but it celebrated the woman she had become and the legacy she left behind. The last line read, Margaret Mitchell Lake proved that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. She came west as a frightened young woman hiding behind a lie and became one of the pillars of our community. Her love story with Harrison Lake, built on honesty and mutual respect, stands as an example of what marriage can be at its best. She will be deeply missed by all who knew her. But the real legacy was not in words on a page. It was in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward the values she and Harrison had instilled. It was in the ranch that still bore the Lake name and continued to thrive generations later. It was in the countless people she had taught to read, the lives she had touched, the community she had helped build. Margaret Mitchell had come west pretending to be a widow, running from a life that would have destroyed her. She had lied to protect herself, to create space to heal and grow. But in the end, the lie had led her to truth, the truth of love, of home, of who she was meant to be. And Harrison Lake, the cowboy who had seen past her mourning clothes to the woman beneath, had loved her not despite her past, but because of everything it had made her. Their love story was proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, and that real love does not require perfection, only honesty. The ranch continued for generations, and every Lake who grew up there heard the story of how it all began with a young woman on a stagecoach, wearing black and carrying a lie, and a cowboy who saw her for who she really was. They learned that home is not where you come from but where you choose to be, that love is not about finding someone perfect, but finding someone who loves you perfectly, flaws and all. And on quiet summer evenings, when the sun sets over the Wyoming grasslands and the wind whispers through the cottonwoods, it is easy to imagine two souls resting together on that hillside, still holding hands after all these years, still grateful for the courage it took to choose love and truth in each other. Their story became part of the fabric of Rock Springs, a reminder that everyone has a past, that people come west for all kinds of reasons, and that what matters is not where you started but who you become. Margaret and Harrison Lake had built something that lasted, something that mattered, something that proved that love, real, honest, enduring love, was worth every risk, every moment of fear, every leap of faith it took to find it.